You mentioned the DNC. One of the people who just jumped into the race for the chair of the DNC is Ben Wikler. He has been the chairman of the Wisconsin State Party. I worked with him at Air America years and years ago. He was also the head of Move On at one point in Avaz, which is sort of like an international iteration, or was, of Move On. Give me your sense of Wikler, what he's done in Wisconsin, and if you have a candidate in this race. I mean, obviously, people like floating Rahm Emanuel's name. I break out at hives at the notion.
Yeah, I'm going to say right up front, Rahm Emanuel is not my candidate.
Yes,
put that on the table.
Would have been my first bet on Polymarket.
Well, what I'll say is this. I think there's talk about Rahm Emanuel. I kind of doubt that he's going to step up on this race because, frankly, there's been a lot of blowback already of people saying that's a terrible idea. You've got a bunch of candidates who are already in. Martin O'Malley, who was former governor of Maryland, ran for president, didn't go very far. I don't necessarily see O'Malley as having a strong lane, but he's in the running, and you never know where things end up. I think right now the front runner is Ken Martin out of Minnesota.
DFL. Yeah.
And remember earlier we were talking about these independent parties, of the past on the left. Minnesota had a Democratic Party and it had a Farmer Labor Party. They merged in the mid 40s and became the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. It's been one of the more progressive state parties in the country for a very long time. It's also, frankly, a successful party. There's a blue wall, or that historic blue wall that started in Minnesota, went all the way over, through Pennsylvania and into maybe even Western New York. And of those places, Martin has successfully kept Minnesota. I don't think he alone, but obviously his party has kept Minnesota in the Democratic column. That's pretty amazing. And he has support from people like Keith Ellison and others who are, people of that state. He's also been out kind of running for this for longer and has developed a lot of endorsements. Ben Wikler just got in, and I think he's gotten in with quite a bit of excitement. And not just in Wisconsin, which is his base, but also around the country. Robert Reich just wrote a very long column talking about why Wikler was the one. I think Michelle Goldberg just had something, and some other folks. And so you're seeing these voices from around the country. More importantly, you're seeing some voices at grassroots activist groups that have been impressed with him. And so I think that Wikler comes in this as a very strong candidate and is also, frankly, seen as probably the candidate with the clearest progressive pedigree or progressive kind of background, however you measure such things. And it's that work and move on. It was an activist organizing commitment. And frankly, it's the story of Wisconsin. Wisconsin was there was a time in the 2010s where it looked like Wisconsin was heading the way of becoming a reddish state, one where Democrats really couldn't compete. And Wikler came in 2019 after I think Democrats had sort of turned the corner a little bit and were starting to come back. But Wikler really built that in at a fundamental level, taking it down to the counties, to the cities, the villages, the precincts. Really building out a multiracial, multi-ethnic party, a party that recognized its need to reach out to all sorts of communities that have frankly been neglected in the past, urban and rural, and it's kind of amazing. There's simply no question that, as an example, in this last election, on all the battleground states, the Democrats lost. They lost everywhere. They lost by dramatically less in Wisconsin. Yep. And notably, I was just looking at some figures out of rural counties. They held their rural vote dramatically better in Wisconsin than they did in other states. They also, frankly, had a boost, not a sufficient one, but a boost in their urban vote, and some really, I think, dynamic, important outreach and efforts in the Black community in Milwaukee, and we're seeing some other places. So you're seeing this kind of granular politics actually kind of working, and not always succeeding in every race because it's a very closely divided battleground state, but something that has worked. And Wikler's been at the heart of that. He really preaches that gospel. And the biggest thing that he achieved is one that I don't think people always measure as closely, although you'll know it, Sam, is that he early on determined that the Wisconsin Supreme Court which was conservative controlled, was a barrier to everything, right? And so over a multi-year period, they developed a model for running candidates for the Supreme Court and winning competitive races. The Supreme Court has now got a progressive majority. And just yesterday, a judge in Dane County threw out Scott Walker's Act 10.
Well, this is what this is where I was heading to. Describe Act 10, because as I'm sitting here, I mean, I doubt you remember, but I was out there covering those protests in Madison, and you are like the it's not official, of course, the mayor of Wisconsin in many respects, and saw you out there, and I'm looking at a sign right now that says the Wisconsin 14 never gave up, when neither will we. Right. This was, I think there were 14 senators who basically left the state and hid out. I can't remember where they went.
They hid out at Great America in Illinois. And they some of them actually like crawled out windows and things and what they were doing is withholding the majority.
Yeah, right? They didn't want a quorum. No quorum there
from the Republicans, and they held it up for a better part of a month. And it was part of a genuine effort to try and prevent Scott Walker, who had won one election, from undoing, a century of Wisconsin progressive governance. And Walker was very, very determined to do that because he wasn't stupid. And Walker knew his way around. He came to power, and what he knew was he needed to do two things. One, gerrymander the state.
Yep.
And they gerrymandered the state at just epic levels of gerrymandering. And then two, undermine the public employee unions, which had been really, in many ways, a backbone of the Democratic Party, and also, in many cases, in a broader sense, progressive politics in Wisconsin. And he did both. He got away with it. And he got away with it despite all the resistance to him, because they basically bent the rules of the legislature, pushed the law through. And then when it was clearly there were multiple violations of standard procedure, practice, the rules, everything, as well as a real huge constitutional problem with unequal protection, right? They exempted some unions that had actually...
The cops and the firefighters were exempted, based upon what? Nothing.
Well, some of them had backed Walker.
Right.
You know what I mean? But he also saw I think he saw the deeper dynamic, which was that these were popular forces within communities, and if you could separate them out from the rest of the labor movement,
100%, and also we're 10 years out from 9/11, where first responders were also sort of like we're still very, very much in the news, in the forefront, and promoted and propagandized in many respects. And one of the other things we got to also mention, it seems to me, is that Wisconsin was at that time almost a laboratory for the Koch brothers and the Americans for Prosperity Project to roll out this legislation, which ended up being model legislation to get rid of right to work and whatnot, and all sort of laundered through ALEC, the American Legislative Executive Committee, and this became sort of like the pilot program for a lot of stuff that we saw across the state. We saw it in Wisconsin when they tried to disempower Evers. We saw that crop up in North Carolina with Cooper. I mean, there was a lot. Wisconsin, in many respects, is sort of like, I remember somebody telling me that some town in Ohio, I can't remember where it is, some city in Ohio is like where Wendy's rolls out their burgers to test it. But Wisconsin very much, it seems like, was like a laboratory for a lot of this sort of really regressive policies.
Look, Wisconsin has historically been referred to as the laboratory of democracy. Brandeis, a century ago, talked about it as such. And it is because Wisconsin's there's a lot of complexities in how Wisconsin operates, but if a governor gets the governorship and control the legislature, it's immensely powerful. You can really set the direction of the state. Now that 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago, when Wisconsin, the most progressive state in the country, or one of the most progressive, when Walker came to power, you went in almost the exact opposite direction. And it did become a laboratory of democracy, or of anti-democracy. It's important to understand that in addition to anti-labor laws, which really did in many ways decimate the labor movement in Wisconsin, which were done to alter the politics of the state. Gerrymandering done to alter the politics of the state. You also saw with the Walker administration and its allies in the legislature a huge attack on the university system and on the University of Wisconsin, and done very cynically, very crudely, in all sorts of ways that challenged. I mean, to this day, they're busy challenging and attacking DEI and things like that. They're constantly trying to put immense pressure on the university to not be, a source of progressive thought, and of course, a source of a place that embraces diversity, that seeks to actually bring more people in, do more, et cetera. And so this right-wing experiment in Wisconsin kind of took in everything you would see from, what you're seeing with DeSantis down in Florida, what you're seeing with, Trump at the national level. You saw it all in Wisconsin. Now, the only reason I put that all on the table, aside from just a little bit of history, is because what happened in Wisconsin with the 2023 Supreme Court election was an opening of the door to address all of the sins, for lack of a better term, of the Walker era, because so many of these things were unconstitutional, so many of these things were lawless, that there really was a space to come in through a legal strategy and upend, many things that Walker did. And so gerrymandering got upended through a multi-step process and had a huge impact on the last election. Now you're seeing, it looks like a process by which the anti-labor laws will be upended. And if that happens, Sam, that's not going to put a thumb on the balance for progressives. What it does, it just simply creates a space where progressives can compete fairly as they had in the past. If that happens, then, well, if it had happened before, if I can just tell you, if the unions had been empowered, if you had, upended Act 10, I think Kamala Harris would have won Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And the legislature would be a Democratic legislature. That's a huge impact. And again, this is not putting a thumb on the scale. What this is doing is saying, look, you want a fair politics. You want unions to be able to have a voice the same way that corporations do, or that, powerful institutions do. And I think maybe because of, a few elections and some smart strategies, Wisconsin might be headed back in that direction.
John Nichols, National Affairs Correspondent for The Nation. Always a pleasure. I learn something every time, actually multiple things, frankly, every time we talk. I really appreciate it.
It's an honor to be with you, Sam. Thanks so much.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.